Quirkedy Quirks. They are everywhere, and it is strange. I wanted to set up a mirror for my website, and I forgot which quirk to use. On GitHub, if you create a repository with the same name as your username, the readme file in that repository will pop up in your profile. That's where I uploaded my website first, but actually, the website needs to be under a different quirky naming scheme. Your github.io domain name, so it needs to be named username.github.io, as in creating a repository with the name alice.github.io. Then automatically alice.github.io, the domain name, which is usually blank, will start showing your website. How quirky is that? And it does work with custom domain names, but you may want to consider using vercel, for example. This way your GitHub serves as a backup, and vercel will copy the repository. And here you can set up a proper custom domain. And as your website grows, GitHub will not complain. Transferring domain names also comes with quirks. You have to wait 60 days after any changes you have made before you can transfer to another registrar. It kind of makes sense when you are registering names, but it's problematic when you are trying to save a few dollars and get away from a soon-to-become overpriced registrar. It's just a few dollars for me, but the principle is what matters here. Buying out a company and then raising prices is a silly business practice that will further destabilize the company and probably turn the whole thing into a huge loss. All my 5 domain names are in transfer mode that no doubt will turn out to be quirky and the website will go out. But, they certainly lost me as a customer. Other than cat pee, I also own Hit Every Beat, where maybe someday I will create workout music with the aid of AI now. This means that I am able to create new songs very frequently, very important for working out. And Fantasy UI, which is about fantasy or sci-fi user interfaces. It is an early stage, but I was also way ahead of the time, which is a way to introduce another quirk. Bootstrap, my UI framework of choice, just now, like a couple of months ago, got dark mode. Until that moment, I had this beautiful and sweetly quirky color transformation system that transformed SCSS files, not just the final CSS files, but the source code SCSS files. But it was really quirky, and it is no way to start a proper business. Now that Bootstrap finally has dark mode, I can just glow the borders, use AI to generate beautiful textures, and add some demo images. Coding up a delicate and responsible dashboard in Svelte that looks like something out of a sci-fi movie would be really fun now. The quirkiest of my code is the simplest operation that you can totally think of. Copying a directory of files. I know, right? But you see, you need to calculate blacklisted files that you don't want to copy, figure out which files have already been copied but may need an update, and which no longer exist at the source and thus should be cleaned out from the destination. And you have to do all this, and you have no other choice You have to do all this in 6 short lines of code, precisely because it is possible and so beautifully simple in the end. You only need to use 2 functions, difference to compare the differences and intersection to see what files are the same. This is fine after you chug a cola, but not so good when you are hunting for bugs. Here, the last thing you need is switching to trying to figure out what intersects what. And you know what? There is an additional component to the 6 lines, and this one is the one that really annoys me. It is when you take the step beyond comparing just the timestamps and try to check the contents. It's a pretty big deal for transferring files between servers. You can't just look at the file size here. You have to calculate a cryptographic checksum. And the problem here is that it is an expensive operation that you should try to avoid, and thus you have to use cache. And now you're caching parts of your lists of sources and destinations. You're no longer working with things that are square and predictable. Now there are patches here and there, and that's no good. You still work with basically 6 lines, but instead of just working with file names, you add that checksum to the file name. Quirky, to say the least. And it gets a bit more complex when you are recursively copying directories of files, and you need to figure out which directories have now been emptied by the not in source anymore procedure. This is the one time where overkill is perfectly justified. When done right, you can do it all in just 10 lines of code. And make copying files smart, performant, and efficient. It would be great to code all this as a standalone program where you can test everything properly, but rarely is there a need for general purpose smart copy. This is usually part of something larger and probably connected to transferring files across servers, where you are not allowed to use standard operating system utilities. In my use case, every time I would update a remote server that it didn't have proper access to, not without trouble, I would also send in a snapshot describing all the files that I updated. It's a static server. There is no real shell unless you're trying to debug it. So the next time I needed to calculate what to upload and what to skip, I would fetch that snapshot file just over standard HTTP, like over the website transfer protocol. And as a result, it would be like having proper access to that remote system. There are better examples of quirky code, especially now as we are entering the age of AI. Hoo-wee. Just wait until you try to get them to talk to each other as they learn to move through a text game or a virtual world based on interesting books about life experiences and such, which is to say, also created by artificial intelligence. Here, the AI would navigate dreams and complex concepts so that they may learn how to think more like humans do. I suspect once you get the language models talking to each other, learning from their experiences in a virtual world, and creating and inventing plausible environments and new thoughts, as in thinking beyond what they were trained with and actually inventing new worlds, new concepts, new ideas, then you get into some really quirky code for sure.